So, oh, wait, okay. So she's here. Anyways, so we last month walked through the Newburgh Dundee project and got a good overview of the opportunities and challenges with that project, the $50+ million project. And then I spent a little bit of time walking through our project delivery processes and our racetrack and the formation of the statewide project delivery branch is really to strengthen project delivery overall on the design side and the construction side, establishing standards of practice across the state, recognizing that we're going to be outsourcing more work, both on the design side and construction side. And there were a series of questions that were asked by the committee members based on both presentations. And I thought what we could do this afternoon is walk through some of the questions and lots of great suggestions, thoughts, and ideas. And let me see if I can share my screen. Are you able to see my screen?
No.
Not yet.
How about now?
There we go.
And so I thought we could walk through some of the questions and have some discussion about topics of interest or further details or information that the committee members may have interest in. And so we'll just, we can work down the list. Oops. So the first question was related to penny bidding. So when Tony Snyder presented the project, there were a few bid items that had penny bids. And there was a question about what is penny bidding and how common is it? I have invited Jaime Viramontes, who is our project controls office manager. And he can also provide some more details about what our approach is to penny bidding and what steps are we taking to address penny bidding. A little bit of the background there is that we did have an audit back in 2017 that looked at over 400 projects and determined that there was quite a bit of unbalanced bidding that takes place in our projects. And they take place today as well. And I want to say about a little over a year ago, I came before the Continuous Improvement Advisory Committee and had shared some of the major initiatives and efforts underway. And one realm was related to cost estimating. And we now have a risk-based cost estimating template that's used statewide. But in addition to that, phase 2 was continuing to refine and update our unbalanced bidding policy. So we have a draft policy in place. And as part of that presentation, Ted Odland had expressed interest in providing some input and feedback on the proposed process and policy that we've developed. So I want to say about 3 or 4 months ago, we met with Ted, the team did, and walked through the policy. And certainly Ted, having a very robust background in construction and also having the relationship with AGC, he shared some of his comments and thoughts and expressed some concerns that he felt that the policy was very one-sided. And maybe I'll just open up to have Ted maybe share a little more of his thoughts based on our last meeting. Because the goal right now is to have an updated policy that we can actually implement and enforce, say by the end of the year. And so we're going to have continued dialogue with AGC on it so that we can certainly ensure that they understand what our expectations are moving forward. So I'm going to turn over to Ted. And Ted, do you want to share some of your thoughts?
Sure, and thank you, David. Basically, unbalanced bidding happens for a couple reasons. One, of course, is a contractor sees where unit pricing is off. They're able to bid a bid item up higher. The quantities are going to overrun, and that's going to fatten up their bid. They're going to make more money on a project, and it's detrimental to the state. It's not something that's good for the state or the industry, actually. But there's many times that as we're bidding projects, and it happens quite often, that the units are not correct. And we see those things, and as a contractor bidding it, you want everybody to be bidding the same thing. So we call into the project office, say, hey, we've got an issue. We have found these units are way different in our takeoff from what you have. And almost always we're told, bid it the way you see it. Well, if you've got a bid item that you know is going to run lower, you're not going to you're not going to bid it with full dollars in it because you're never going to get paid for that. And so you adjust your bid and you lower that, which actually benefits the state and keeps the price of the bid down. Other times we look at items that the state has come out with their method of how they believe the contractor is going to build it. And a contractor says, well, I'm not going to do it that way. I'm going to do it another way. And it changes some of those bid items. You're not going to use as many flaggers. You're not going to do as much embankment. I mean, there's a number of things that you can do. So you're going to drop your bid pricing. It's going to look very unbalanced, but it's a different mean and methods, and it gets you to the low bid. And it again can benefit the state. The specifications say that we can't unbalance a bid if it's detrimental to the state. In other words, it's going to hurt the state. They have a right to throw the bid out for that. And I think if ODOT did that in some cases, brought a contractor in, said, this is obviously unbalanced, you're going to have to explain that to us. And if you can't explain it to us and show us where it's going to help the state, we're going to throw the bid out. You would end a lot of the other problems where they're taking advantage of it in the wrong way. So it's not just a simple matter. And my comments to Ken or to David and his group was, let's get about 4 or 5 contractors that are bidding projects all the time in the state. Let's put them into a room. Let's talk about what the issues are, and let's come up with an answer that works for both the state and the contractors. And I think we can do that. And I think that's a proper way to do it, because the language that David's committee came up was very one-sided and was going to create some problems that I don't think they could foresee until they started bidding under it. So I would just suggest that we take the time, get the right people in the room, talk about what the issues are, what the outcomes need to be, and we could come up with it as we have in the past, working together, and it works out for everybody.
And I have Jaime Viramontes on the line. Again, he's with our project controls office. Jaime, can you provide a little bit of background on the study that we did that looked at unbalanced bid and the magnitude of the harm it has done to the state in terms of dollars? Or did we lose him?
Hey, David, can you allow us to see the people instead of the screen, sir?
Folks, just be aware Paula has her hand raised as well.
Oh,
For the individuals that aren't showing, I think they have to turn their video on.
Oh, no, just quit sharing your
Oh,
Yeah.
memo.
Okay, got it. Okay.
Yeah, there you go.
Thanks.
Cool. Yeah, are there any more questions?
David, it's Paula. In the audit that you referred to, where they identified that up to 90% of the contracts had unbalanced bids, did they then chase those contracts or projects through the end to compare to engineer's estimate versus final cost to see if in fact they did result in higher costs to the state?
That's a good question, and that would more like be a question that I would have to have Jaime Viramontes answer, and it looks like he fell off the call. Oh, there you are, Jaime. Do you have an answer to that question about did the audit go back and look at the projects to see if there was actual harm done to the state? You're on mute.
Well, I called in. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. The audit did not go back and look at those specific projects. One of the items that we didn't have at the time that we do have now is the tools to be able to actually track the cost of any unbalanced bids as compared to the final cost of the contract and associated change orders with those particular projects. So we have been doing that now over the last 3 years. We've got very, very good data, and we can isolate now the projects on not only the number of projects that are unbalanced, but also the total cost and detriment to the state. That is one of the reasons why we've provided at least a new proposed specification for unbalanced bidding. And I wanted just to quickly mention that in the review, just in general for what we're providing as a fairness, or at least some sense of fairness to the contractors, ODOT recognizes that contractors sometimes have advantages with respect to either equipment or process. So our new standard specification does address that, in that the committee that's going to be set up to review an unbalanced bid is going to reach out to those contractors, as Ted mentioned, and we are going to meet with them and find out, does this provide the lowest cost to the state? And a good example of that is, for example, one contractor might have a really large excavation job, but they might have another job or can get with another contractor in terms of trucking. Trucking seems to be pretty expensive depending on how far you're hauling material. But if a contractor has an advantage in either finding a really close disposal site, and you see this with paving companies all the time, when they're doing projects in their backyard and they have access to their disposal facilities within their property, their costs are really low. Conversely, if you're out in a remote area and the contractor has that same advantage where they find either another project to go and place material, and it's their same project, they're going to have a very, very large advantage. And what seems to be an unbalanced bid is actually going to be a benefit to ODOT in terms of the cost. So we are going to ask those questions of the contractors. We're going to meet first to determine whether the quantities are correct or not, and we're going to do that early. We've got some steps in place now, some QA in terms of the quantities to make sure they are correct first, and then we will have those meetings with the contractors to determine if they have a reasonable explanation. We do reserve, though, as an agency in the new proposed specification for the committee to determine whether what the contractor is proposing is reasonable. And if it's not, and if it's going to cause detriment to the state, that's when we would look at the second low responsive bidder to determine if they have any unbalanced bids, and we'd start the process again. So does that answer your question, David, or is there anything else you want to cover on that?
I think that gives pretty good insight to our approach. There were some questions about credits and debits, and I think that's a concern that Audlin had expressed, and I think we are going to move forward with meeting with AGC. And maybe what we can do is, once we're at a place where we have alignment and agreement with industry, maybe come back to this committee and just give them a brief update saying we have a policy in place now that really levels the playing field for all contractors being on for that job.
And I'll just add, we are planning to meet with AGC, set up a couple meetings probably next month. And we really appreciate Ted coming to the table and reviewing that specification in advance. He's got a lot of years in the industry and construction. And what he said is directly what we anticipated in terms of where contractors may be with this. One important note that's also in the memo that David is sharing is that Washington State has a very, very similar unbalanced bid specification, and they just don't see penny bids. They actually have a specification that provides per bid item any kind of 25% or over or under where they make some adjustments. They relate that to the penny bids as well, and they do have those same conversations with contractors at bid time. And we have a lot of the same contractors that bid in Washington. Those same contractors in Washington are not providing penny bids in Washington, but they are in Oregon. So we're just trying to level the playing field, like David mentioned.
Thanks, Jaime. So the first three questions related to unbalanced bidding and our approach and what steps are we taking to address it. And we've identified it, there has been detriment to the state, and we're actively taking steps to work that with industry. The next three questions, and I won't put these on the screen, but the next three questions really related to funding, state funding versus federal funding. What was the breakdown? And within ODOT's portfolio, about 80% of our project funding is federally funded. And the critical distinction there is any project that is federally funded, we can establish hard DBE goals, meaning these are contractual requirements that the contractors must submit as part of their bid that they can demonstrate they're going to meet a goal. So example, our Oregon 217 project, and roughly $110 million is going to go to bid here in August. It has a 13% hard goal. Every contractor has to demonstrate they're going to meet that hard goal. If the project was purely state funded, we do not apply hard goals. We would apply aspirational targets on those projects. And that's what played out with the Newburgh-Dundee project, is there are multiple phases, and some of those phases were purely state funded. In many respects, when we state fund a project, we don't necessarily have to follow all the federal requirements. And so we're able to get the project out quicker in terms of design and meeting the community expectations and commitments of that project. And what we saw with Tony Snyder's presentation is that the DBE participation on that project was, I believe, just 0.4%. And so we do know that establishing hard goals is in a lot of ways a hammer in ensuring that the contractors meet the goal. We have had instances where during the bidding process, contractors have not demonstrated they can meet the goal, and those bids have been deemed to be non-responsive, and we go to the next, second low bidder on the projects. Any questions on state or federal funding?
Yeah, David, can you walk us through what opportunities we might have in a completely state-funded project to build in our own DBE goals that may or may not be the same as the federal goals, but we would still maybe have some of the efficiency of not having to follow all the federal rules in terms of the project, so we could still get it delivered, but meeting our own goals and not make them aspirational. I mean, and maybe I'm quibbling over the word, but put them in the bid as a required goal, but not because of any state law. Can we have our own?
To my knowledge, I don't believe that we can today, and I think it may be in statute. This is something I'm going to have to punt to the Office of Civil Rights because it's a technicality piece. I have just heard, because I've asked that question before too, about why can't we have hard goals on state-funded projects, and the response is we're not allowed to per state law. And so that would be a good conversation and dialogue to have with the Office of Civil Rights when they come to speak before the committee. We've strived for aspirational targets, and it's been with mixed success. At times, I feel that having goals on projects is a burden to contractors. And I say that because when a contractor, say, has a 5% goal on a project, they will report out only the 5%. They may actually have that 8%, but the paperwork, it's not required as long as they can demonstrate they meet the minimum goals. And on a state-funded project, it's a struggle to get paperwork of what levels of participation do they have from a DMWESB veteran-owned businesses. It's a struggle to get them to submit the paperwork. So I think there's an opportunity for the CIAC to dig in a little more to see how we can strengthen our goal setting process and make those contractual requirements as part of all the transportation projects. But I'm
Um,
not the subject matter expert in this realm, and so that's something that we'll have to look to the Office of Civil Rights for.
Chair Smith, David, this is Amber. So there are ways that ODOT can either have a race neutral program for federally funded projects that mandate hard goals, and for state only funded projects, ODOT can create race neutral hard goals. Mike, my colleague here, I'm sure could speak to some of the strategies that the city uses extremely effectively. So those things can be done. I guess my commentary, respectfully, David, is that I would disagree that we need to think innovatively about ways to incentivize prime contractors to utilize small businesses, including minority women-owned businesses, as well as veteran-owned businesses. In which case, for low bid projects, which is the bulk of the opportunities for which ODOT procures, what are techniques that can be included in the specifications that financially incentivize a prime to meet the performance measures that have been identified by ODOT around social equity.
I know,
This is Ted. If I could make a comment, David, one of the reasons that a contractor, you have an aspirational goal of 5% and he makes 8 or 10 or 12 and he only goes to the 5 is because if we put in that we have 8% or 10%, that then becomes the goal. And if we then have a subcontractor minority who falls out, can't do the work or doesn't, the units are dropped or what have you, we have to make that back up. And so that's exactly why they'll stick only to the 5%. They will try to get the best pricing and the right contractors in, but they very seldom would ever show more than that. We've tried to suggest in the past that we do a system of being able to, we could bring 10 or 15% on a job that had 5 and bank that and not get punished for it, but bank it and utilize it on other projects. So contractors are trying to get as much minority as they can so they can use it on projects where it'll actually give them an advantage. So there's some ways we could do things that would be a little different.
Has there been the creation of a mentor protege type arrangement in the construction community, like the design and consultant world has embraced?
Yes, and we have a number of, I've mentored probably 10 different minority contractors over the years, and we help them even bid other contractors. So yeah, that is going on.
So if the state pays a lot of attention to the encouragement of those mentor protege relationships on contracts, maybe there are incentives, as Amber talks about, some way to, I don't know how you do it in a low bid situation, but encouraging the ability for them to do that.
Well, one of the things we've tried not to do is to tie up a minority contractor with just one contractor. And his chances of getting work is by bidding the field out there. And so, and remember that mentoring is voluntary and it's hard to, regulate voluntary work. So it's really a balancing act out there of trying to bring in contractors, teach them to be good contractors, and make sure that they're getting out and bidding to everybody. so they get a better chance.
So
Yeah,
we do have a formal mentor protege program. We've partnered with the Port of Portland to deliver that program. And Assistant Director Perkins is evaluating that program to see how well it's serving ODOT, because we know the port does more than just transportation. They do vertical construction. So we're seeing who's graduated and are there more effective means to get more of the minority contractors that do ODOT work into the program. To Amber's point, I think there are opportunities for incentivizing. We have incentives related to apprenticeship and workforce development, and contractors can choose to participate, and we'll reimburse them dollars if we get good participation there. And then certainly our alternative contracting approach, CMGC and design build. So CMGC, Rose Quarter, there's opportunities to look at an equity plan. We're currently developing a program for design build. We have a very large design build project in Region 4. There's a lot more flexibility in working with the contractor and the design firms and establishing goals and packaging work packages that make sense, that are good for minority contractors, that there's capacity in the community to perform that type of work. The other piece is I feel that ODOT has pretty strong relationships with a lot of trade associations like the Oregon Association of Minority Entrepreneurs, the National Association of Minority Contractors, NAMAC, Latino Build, and then PBDG, Professional Builders and Developers Group, where we are sharing project lists and we are identifying where the gaps and barriers are for these minority contractors. Just had a meeting yesterday with NAMAC and PBDG, and one of the areas that we're finding issues with is the COVID office and the difficulties of trying to get contractors certified. That's going to be a barrier. I mean, we have a lot of contractors that are trying to get certified, and the perception is lack of trust with government or just navigating through the paperwork to get certified. And these are contractors that will count towards the disparity study. So we're working with these trade associations, with other sister agencies, AGC, ACEC, to see where there's gaps and trying to build that capacity and identifying what those barriers are and listening to them. And then they're also providing feedback to us of what are barriers at ODOT that we can help navigate through. And certainly size of projects is a big one. If we can break down these projects to smaller packages, we can do that. A little more difficult on the low bid side, but again, with CMGC and design build, we have the ability to break those work packages down.
Hey, David, can I jump in real quick? Hey, everybody, this is Cooper. A couple of things I wanted to just bring to the conversation related to some of the questions that are coming up. One, to Amber, your question about what we can do on the state-funded projects. I think Nicotris and team really are looking as part of the strategic action plan work. They're revisiting some of our kind of rote answers that we've had in the past of, well, we just can't do that, it's not allowed. She has done some work there. I don't know exactly where it stands, but we will make sure that that is a part of the conversation when she comes and talks here soon to this group. And we anticipated this would be an area where she'll need to do a deep dive and give you the latest. So that work is in train and being thought about. The other thing I'd throw on the table, just to make sure y'all are tracking, we've related a little bit to your question, Paula, about the MentorProtege work. We're undertaking an effort here to better understand what are the potential benefits and pitfalls of community benefit agreements, community workforce agreements, PLAs, and the like. We know that we're behind the power curve on that, and we haven't used them as an agency. And we know that there's tremendous opportunity with some of the big projects coming down the pike in the Portland region. So think of the interstate bridge replacement, some of the tolling work, et cetera, that there's going to be a lot of opportunity there. So we've been in conversation with the governor's office and lots of folks to try to be more intentional and lean into that space to understand how we could use these tools. And we've identified a team that cuts across our urban mobility office, our social equity office, and our contract project delivery folks that are, one of them actually works for David. So we're trying to get our arms around this. I'll be real frank. We got a lot to learn because we just haven't used them before. And so that's an ongoing conversation as well. We're probably going to bring on some outside help to help us get our arms around that. The other thing that I'd throw in that space is, I think is House Bill 3011 made a requirement for us to have PLAs associated with contracts over, I believe for projects over $10 million that have a significant portion of ARPA funds associated. The only project where that really fits for ODOT is the next phase of the Newburgh Dundee project. And so we are working concurrently on identifying what that PLA needs to look like, and trying to make sure that that work is nested closely with this ongoing research into CWAs and CBAs, and what's the model that we want to employ, and when do we want to employ it, and how do we want to employ it in the future. So I just wanted folks to be aware of that. It's all pretty nascent at this stage, but it plays into this conversation.
So Cooper, happy to connect you or whoever you'd like with the folks who are managing our CBA out at Columbia Boulevard wastewater treatment plant. It's about a $400 million project. Kiewit's on it, Stantec is on it, and we're just having great results with that, not only from a minority contractor perspective, but also diversifying the workforce in the trades. And those folks are, they're used to doing it, and they're pros at it, and we can learn some lessons. We're learning for sure. And hopefully a lot of those lessons are transferable on smaller projects and different kinds of work. So happy to connect with somebody if you'd like.
We certainly welcome that connection, Mike. Thank you.
Yep.
Great. So moving on, the next series of questions focused on project delivery. And one of the questions that was asked, and I think this was from Mike, was related to where in the process do we identify the delivery method of a project? That really occurs in our scoping phase. So ODOT right now, we are in the process of scoping our 24-27 state. And so as we look at these projects, the size, the location, the type, and the risks, and primary risks would be environmental permitting and right-of-way. If we determine the risks to be low, then we will start looking at the tools we have to assess each project and say, this project may be right for design, build, and CMGC. We'll have more dialogue and conversations. And that way we can program the dollars accordingly, because when we program the federal funds, we have design and construction combined. And so making sure the funds are in place. But there's robust conversations that play out with the regions and with headquarters. We have an evaluation tool that's now been created to evaluate those prime projects that may be right for evaluating different delivery methods. And we're building our portfolio. So the past couple of years, it's been developing the CMGC contracts and procurement processes for Rose Quarter. We have a multi-parameter process, best value, A plus B plus C plus D, which is cost, time, experience, and contractor qualifications. We just applied that to the Trunnion project with resounding success, and the contractor completed that project early. We're going to be applying that approach for the I-205 project. And so some of these more complex projects that require special contractor qualifications, we've used that approach. We're building the design build program right now to prepare for Region 4. And then we'll be starting work on IDIQ as part of our ADA program to see if there's ways to expedite and streamline delivery of our ADA projects. So we're expanding our tools. And as Cooper said, this is an area that we're learning and growing. WashDOT has a very, very robust design build program. And we've learned a lot from our partner states about some of the successes and challenges that they have with their delivery models. Another question that was asked related to project delivery was how are construction projects monitored? And so we have a series of authorities that are in place. We have construction offices that ODOT oversees and manages, and we administer those construction contracts. We have others where we actually hire consultants to oversee and manage those contracts. But with every project, we have a baseline budget and schedule that's in the contract, and then change orders. And depending on the size and scale of the change orders, some of those changes can go all the way up to the commission level. We're fortunate that the commission has delegated authorities to the director and and to the assistant directors and the division administrators to where we can make timely decisions. And so that's been helpful. And our commitment is that we'll track those changes and categorize those changes as elective, unanticipated, or avoidable. And those that are avoidable, feedback loop to see are there trends, and if there are, what can we do to mitigate those avoidable types of changes in the future. Another question that was asked was related to what systems and database do you use for data mining? And the power of data is incredible. When I came down to Salem here in 2018, we had robust data systems for HR and finance. There wasn't much in the world of project delivery. And over the past 2 years, we've established a very solid foundation to pull source data systems out of our legacy systems and newer systems. And now we have reports that can track when projects are on time, expenditures, whether they've overspent, tying it to schedules, tying it to risk. And so we have numerous reports now that allow us to flag projects, allow us to get ahead and manage those issues before it's too late. And so we have a data warehouse that we've been able to leverage and standardized reports through commercial channels like Power BI, Excel, and other web-based reports that now are available to all our project managers and area managers and region managers to take a look at. The other benefit's going to be tracking performance. We've now created a new report where we can track the amount of time it takes for us to get a consultant contract on board. And that's been an area that we've been struggling with a bit. So we're trying to leverage the power of data to make good informed decisions. And data is going to continue to grow. And we realize how critical data plays in the work that ODOT does, to the point where we have created a new chief data officer position. And I believe that's hit the street. I don't know if Bob or Cooper want to speak to the chief data officer position.
Maybe I'll cede the floor to Bob if he wants to give you a quick overview.
Yeah, good afternoon, everyone. Yeah, so we did hit the street on Tuesday with the help of an executive recruiting firm to market and seek a chief data officer for the agency. The enterprise, the state hired a chief data officer just about 2 years ago. So responsible for operating under House Bill 3361 from the 2017 legislature to really move the state into a more sophisticated open data portal, the kinds of things that are of interest to the citizens and contracting community as well. So ODOT as the third or fourth largest agency in the state has really followed suit. We've been at the table as Catherine Helms, the state CEO, has formed her program, take it down a notch into our agency, our sophistication and needs for good and rich data sources and data mining capability, as David just articulated. They grow by the hour, quite frankly. So we've decided to make an intentional lean, hire a chief data officer. We'll form a data solutions branch within the support services area. And then there'll be probably a hub and spoke model in how we manage data protocol, standardization, the means and methods by which we get alongside the business and move information, because I've often said that we're not necessarily data starved, but we are information starved on many fronts. So really just growing our sophistication in this big data world, and this hiring a CDO is the first step, major step in that direction. So we're excited to have started that, hoping to have someone on board within the next 60 days, and then lean fully into organizing around an office and growing into this programmatic and strategic need for the agency.
So I'll open up for any further questions or comments on the data piece. Hearing none. The next question was related to process improvement and how does the project get baselined within the racetrack and how is change monitored? So we.
Hey, David.
Yes.
Sorry to interject. Sorry, but time check here. I know we got limited time, and I'm wondering if it's not worth quickly flying over to very, very high cliff Clip, any other kind of pertinent things on those documents? Since I think the committee members have the actual answers, and then maybe turning to those overarching questions that we want to make sure we're getting feedback on from this group. I think they started that with the questions that you're running through right now, but I want to make sure that as you've had time to mull it over, committee members, we have the opportunity for you to share those questions with us. So can you maybe shift it that way, David?
Yeah, so the themes, project delivery, unbalanced bidding, DBE, and then the latter half was related to workforce and climate and equity. And so, the presentations were provided last month. Are there certain areas that this committee has a strong interest in that have more dialogue or conversation on?
I have one issue, David, and that's local hiring. We just saw that as a possibility in the 205 project coming out. And, hiring by zip code, and it's going to make it impossible to get people on these projects and to fulfill our minority goals that we're going to need if we've got to sit there and try to concentrate on hiring somebody in a local area. We can't find people now to get on projects, and we're hiring from different states, let alone just in one area.
Hey, Ted, are you referring to that, as I understand, is that I guess is FHWA kind of pilot program where they can kind of overlay the census tracts on the contracting? Is that just to make sure we're tracking what you're saying?
Yeah, this is something that's been pushed around for quite a while, where they Multnomah County wanted to do it, and it's our project, and we want the people in our neighborhoods to get the jobs, and it just doesn't work that way. I mean, we have people in the industry, and they're scattered, and they come from all over, and you start limiting where we can hire people from. There's no way to staff these projects, especially these large jobs. It just came out on the 205. It's one of the things they're planning to do, and it's going to really hurt. So I don't know how you would staff the project if that really comes about.
Yeah, I guess this Amber, I'll follow up on what Ted just said. It is about priorities, in which case, if you have diversity goals in the workforce, it'll be much more difficult, if not almost impossible, to reach the diversity goals, because the local hiring will mitigate that goal. Then you can't achieve the diversity goal because of the local hiring affects it. So yeah, I agree with Ted.
I had a question that was a little different about workforce, and it was more aimed at ODOT's internal workforce and project management oversight. For design build, have you taken up special training and development for staff who have been traditionally design bid build project managers? It's so different. And so have you got a plan for development of your own staff to enable them to be good project managers for design build and major project delivery?
Paula, that's a great question. And unfortunately, my response is no, we don't have anything planned right now, because we really haven't cut our teeth into those programs, right? And so we have identified a team. We have consultants on board. In fact, we have WSP on board to help with the program development piece, as well as the project support piece. So we're going to be relying on industry to help bring us along to build that capacity and knowledge transfer. Doing it alone, we're not going to be successful, but talking to industry, they have a lot of experience. So how do we leverage industry experience to help mentor us, get us trained up so that we can ultimately fish on our own and be successful in delivering these projects and having others fish for us. And then certainly WashDOT's been a great partner in providing some trainings. We've gotten a lot of trainings in different areas, but the design build program is one that we're going to have to pursue, because ultimately the interstate bridge project, there's a lot of different packages there that we're looking at alternative delivery as well. So getting our own schooled up in the different delivery methods is going to be huge in terms of our ability to leverage these powerful tools for delivery. Thanks for that.
So it's on your radar. I just think it's something that caught us by surprise years ago, that it's not transferable skill necessarily, and how you set the culture for the management of the project really matters.
Paula, thank you for that. That's really good insight, because we have found it on CMGC projects and design build that it's real tough for old-time project managers doing a low bid to transfer over and make those projects successful.
And just one more thing to add to that is we do have a project manager in Bend who's overseeing that design build project, who comes from Virginia.
Karen, sorry to interject, but I don't think we can hear you, or I certainly can't hear you. Can you maybe
Okay.
closer to the mic?
Yeah, so because I'm in the same room. As David, we're trying to figure out this new model, right, of remote, but together. So in Region 4, Omar, who's the project manager overseeing the US 97 design build, he's done a lot of design build before. So that is good knowledge. But I think, like you said, during construction, we got to make sure that we have the right people out there. Omar's mentoring them on how to oversee it, but he is the person overseeing that project. So we will make sure to have some of that knowledge carried through. And then try to see if we have more projects we can identify for design build before IBR comes out.
Well, then maybe Omar in his spare time can do some mentoring or seminars for the rest of the regions. I mean, he's got, there's nothing like on the job training. So if he's got an ongoing project, maybe there's a way to leverage his work, you know, using this wonderful new platform that we all hate.
So I think that covers my piece for the project delivery questions. Are there other questions out there that we want to cover?
Well, I think not. I think that was great. And I just want to make sure that we hear from everybody on the committee if they have other thoughts and feedback on how we can improve our major project delivery based on the questions that we've had answered. And are there any other insights or suggestions or questions that would, you know, prompt us to think about new ways of doing things and how to improve? So maybe just an open discussion if there's something that we haven't covered that people want to talk about.
So this is Amber. The only other thing I would add is, and I think we talked about this at the last one, but picking up on what Paula said and Ted's follow-up comments, it's not clear to me how ODOT determines alternative delivery, and I just want to put an exclamation mark that ODOT does not do a lot of alternative delivery, but it is a very effective strategy to both create a lot of opportunities for DBE, to build capacity, to achieve a diverse workforce, and to meet many of the other social equity components that you're trying to do. And which I only raise this because of the 205 project, which is it's using A, B, C method or whatever, but it's not using, say, for example, CMGC or design bid build or something like that. And so like, again, so what is the criteria that results in the selection of one procurement delivery method over another? And how does that fall in line? How are some of the prioritization of these things? How do they fall in line with the key performance measures that we're trying to help you achieve?
So Amber, that's a great question. When we developed the project selection matrix tool, it was developed prior to the strategic action plan. And so I think it may be time for us to apply the lens of equity to the selection tool. And so my ask would be, could we have a follow-up discussion with you, Amber, walk through the tool and get your perspective and input on it? And then maybe based on that, we can revisit it and then maybe through Amber report back to this committee of, yeah, we made some tweaks or adjustments to ensure that the equity elements is addressed in each of the different delivery methods versus it may be for one but not the other. So I would welcome that conversation. It's a good way to integrate the action plan into our existing tools, templates, and programs.
Sure, I'd be happy to. Ted, I'd love to pick your brain because I really value your advice, if that would be okay, sir.
Anytime, you bet.
Cool. Thank you.
That sounds great. I'd love to have you guys have that conversation and then maybe report back to the committee. That would be terrific.
Well, I think there's some things that David has brought up, that there's some ideas out there floating around that we could talk about. And you know, there's many times we can't see what's driving the state. And when we get together and talk about it, we can come up with some pretty good ideas that help the industry.
Great. Unless there's any last kind of burning questions, and of course, if something comes to anybody later, certainly bring it up at another meeting or shoot an email. Maybe we should transition to our next topic, which is sort of our information flow, and which will tee up our discussion for the next meeting.
Thank you.
That was great. All right, well, can someone pull up the slides for me? Victoria, Sabrina, I'm not sure which one of you is driving.
I've got it here, Cooper. Give me just a second.
You bet. Thanks, Sabrina. So just while she's pulling those up, the topic at hand is our performance measures as an agency. And so today, what I wanted to do is give you the landscape of how we're thinking about strategic performance measures, if you will, describe the kind of major buckets that we have in this space, the work that we're trying to do to integrate these buckets, and then also turn to talking a little bit about our key performance measures, which by statute, you have a role in helping us develop and refine as the CIAC. And so really setting the stage as Chair Smith mentioned for the August conversation. So today, hoping to lay a little of that foundation and get your initial feedback, things you want to dive more deeply into, more information you think that you need to be prepared for a dialogue in August. So, and I'm joined by my colleague, PK, Phil Case, who is our KPM lead for the agency, and I'll turn to him if there are any hard questions. So when we get there, but let me just dive in, and apologies for the PowerPoint, Chair Smith. I know how much you don't like them, but I do feel it's necessary, at least in the way my mind works, to give a little bit of visual and background of this. So
I don't mind PowerPoints. I just don't like only PowerPoints.
okay, all right, good to know. So I've got a little bit of rope here. So so next slide, please. So this slide really just shows us the constellation that I like to say, the word I like to use, of our strategic measures that we have in the agency, and they're really three big buckets. We have our strategic action plan metrics, and we talked about the strategic action plan at the last meeting. I think y'all are familiar with that, but again, this is the document that the commission approved at the end of last year and is really setting a clear roadmap for us as an agency. These are the priorities, these are the goals, these are the implementing outcomes we want to see in the next 2 or 3 years. So there's those measures represented there in that goldy orange shade. We have federal measures as well. And the majority of these come from the FAST Act. So we have to hit these to ensure we get our federal dollars. And then of course we have KPM's key performance measures, which are part and parcel of our, I think every agency's budget process. And these are legislatively approved as part of that budget endorsement. So next slide, please. Oh, and the other PMs that you see there, we have a multitude of programmatic measures that help us gauge how we're doing within our respective programs. We're not going to really focus on those because what I think we can use the committee for is really your thinking on how do we tie together the strings of the strategic measures is how I would describe it. Actually, can you skip this slide? I think that's just a little much. We're short on time. Okay, so this slide shows if I orient you here on the left-hand side, are the priorities and goals that come out of the strategic action plan. We talked about them. Modern transportation system, equity, and sufficient and reliable funding. Those are the three priorities that we care most about as an agency. The commission has endorsed and directed us to pursue. There are subordinate goals, if you will, right there. They're listed there in gray as well. If you look at the spaghetti noodles, you see there the blue ones represent our key performance measures. We currently have 13 key performance measures. We're going to walk through those in a little bit. And those were established and really came online in 1993. That's why you see that date there on the left. Below that, you see the strategic action plan metrics. And those were established and really came online this year, at the end of last year. And then in the bottom, you see our federal measures. And I should say there are 11 of those strategic action plan measures that are associated with those outcomes we want to see in the next couple of years. Below that, you see in green, you see the federal measures. There's 17 of these. And again, these came out of the FAST Act. And so you see their kind of origin date is 2016 when they came online. What we're trying to do here and what this really demonstrates is we're trying to take all of these measures, tie them into a coherent kind of braided strand that falls underneath really the umbrella of the strategic action plan. As the strategic action plan is our roadmap, that's really the umbrella or the tent. And what we're trying to do is take these other measures and integrate them and make sure that they're nested and coordinated with that overarching vision as described in the strategic action plan. And you'll see that your CIAC role there at the bottom. I think there's value in us bringing this to this table to get your thoughts on how we do this and make sure we're thinking through this kind of clearly. That said, that's a little bit more than what is defined as your role in statute. The CIAC role in statute dictates that you review the status of our key measures and provide feedback on them. And that's your focus is KPMs per the statute. But I think there's value in broadening the aperture here. So I just wanted you to be aware of that. Let's transition to the next slide, please. This is really busy, so I'll go through it pretty quick. But the idea here is it shows us kind of how the existing measures, whether they're federal or key performance measures, nest underneath that tent of the strategic action plan. So again, on the left, you have this SAP priorities and goals, and then you can see there as color-coded kind of where we rack and stack the current existing federal and KPMs within those respective buckets. Next slide, please. So this is another way of looking at it, and I apologize, I'm visual, so I find value in these. If you don't, I welcome your feedback, and I won't have as many. But this is another way of showing the integration that we're trying to strike. And there are there's some gaps in terms of our strategic action plan measures. We have very clear metrics on the outcomes that we want to see over the next 2 years. So for instance, in the electrification space, we have as one of those outcome areas that we talked about last time, we'd like to see a tripling of electric vehicles on our roadways. So that's a measure associated with the strategic action plan. But some of the goals that those near-term outcomes are really driving, those don't have clear measures associated with them. And so the idea is, let's look at the measures that we have, federal or KPMs, and see if we can, if those fit the bill or how those might need to be morphed to really get at the heart of those goals as described in the strategic action plan. Next slide, please. This is a busy one too. The idea here is just to show you that there are different timelines associated. It's a little bit of the key takeaway. There's complexity in the process here, right? And for all of these measures, there's different timelines associated. So we have a 3-year timeline for developing and refining the strategic action plan measures. And that's really dictated by the commission and by us as a department. That seemed right to the commission, that we'll circle back and revisit them every 3 years per statute and per state requirements. The KPMs are updated every 2 years, and then the federal requirements are done on a 4-year cycle. So it just shows that there's a little bit of complexity as we try to figure out where to plug in and how to integrate those. Next slide, please. This is where we are on the current KPM timeline. And for those of you on the committee who were around in this last iteration, you'll recall some of those conversations we had at this table around our KPMs. And we have taken those conversations, taken that to the commission. They endorsed putting forward the existing 13 KPMs, and we ran it through the process. And in fact, just at the end of session, we got the formal approval of the existing 13 KPMs. There are 2, though, that from conversations around this table, 2 of the 13 that were recommended we adjust, and we're going to talk through those in a second. But one thing I want you to kind of see here on this slide is, I think we're at an opportune moment right now in the KPM cycle for us to have this larger conversation about how do we integrate all of these measures more effectively, whether we're talking about SAP, KPMs, or federal. The moment is right in my mind. Next slide, please. So we're going to shift gears now. But at first I wanted to give you the landscape of the kind of strategic measures. Now we're going to shift gears to the KPMs. And recall, this is really your charge per statute to help inform us on key performance measures, as those of you who've been on the committee have done in the past. These are the 13 that we currently have. And there is an annual report that was in your packet that is, a requirement for us to submit to the commission and then submit to LFO that lays out how we're doing on all of our measures. When we come back in August, we'd welcome your feedback on that report, because we intend to then after that take it to the commission with whatever feedback you provide in order to kind of meet the timelines that was associated on the previous slide. These are the 13 measures we have. You'll see that 2 of them have stars by them. And these are the 2 that we are proposing change. And this is in part based on the feedback we heard from committee members a year or 2 ago, earlier in the cycle. So real quickly, the first one, bikeways and walkways. I'm not going to get into the details. You had a 1-pager in your packet that describes what we're trying to do in this space. But the bottom line is the current measure really looks at the amount of bikeways and walkways associated with urban state highway miles that we have across the state. So it's a pretty broad kind of measure. What we're trying to do is target it a little more and overlay the transit network that's associated and the demographics of communities. A little bit to the comment that you made earlier, Ted, to understand where can we target our investments and create priority corridors for walking and biking rather than just looking across the board, because we have limited funds to do this, although we do have more than we've had in the past. But let's make sure that we really, really target it where there's the greatest need where we know there are more walkers and more bikers, and give the infrastructure that's most needed, focus on crosswalks and other things. So that's really the 30-second kind of overview of what we're trying to do on that bikeway and walkways is demonstrate a little bit more of the complexity that's really at the heart of measuring our success here. And then the other one that you'll see there, DMV field office wait times. Our current measure, I believe, is the amount of the percentage of customers who receive service at our DMV field offices, and we have 60 of them across the state, but the percentage of ones that receive service within 20 minutes. That's a problematic measure for a number of reasons. One, it doesn't reflect our shift away from in-person service, and we're really trying to be intentional about having more online services. And we've got a lot of tools in the last year that have come online in that space. We've got self-service kiosks that have popped up around the state as well, that we're putting up around the state. And so it's not really reflective of kind of where we are. So what we're proposing instead is a service index is what we're calling it, that factors in addition to how long it takes someone to get service there in the DMV lobby, how long it takes someone to get service over the phone, and how many folks are using the self-service kiosk, and how long it takes someone to get a title transaction, because that's been problematic for us in the past. It's taken way too long. So that's the heart of what we're trying to do for that DMV change that, again, is in your packet as a one-pager. Next slide, please. So let me turn to as I mentioned, the annual KPM report that is in your packet, and I think it's 50 odd pages, so it's rather copious, but I'm going to summarize what it says. It talks about how we're doing on our 13 KPMs. And this is the way we think about it. We think about them as on target or off target, and steady or improving or worsening. So targets and trends. Next slide, please. This is another way of representing that, the quad chart that really shows that, and it shows where each of our 13 measures currently land. And you'll see that there are quite a few that are on target, steady and improving, but there are also quite a few that are off target and worsening. And I really want to focus our attention on those four because I think those are the ones that we really need to make sure we're doubling down our attention and effort on. The thing I'd flag here, and you'll see in the footnote there, why some of these are grayed out. It's really a reflection of these are the ones that are, I guess, more complex in terms of delivering these outcomes, and they're not solely within the purview of ODOT. So for instance, public transit vehicle condition, we certainly have a role to play there, but we have to work hand in glove with our local transit agencies to really reach this goal. Same with traffic congestion. There's a lot of factors that come into play here, but no doubt we play a central role, but there's others as well. And so that's really just a reflection of how we think about it, not as a way to kind of get off the hook, but as a way to understand some of the complexities at play. Next slide, please. These are the four that were off target. I'll walk through real quickly where they are, and then happy to answer more detailed questions or maybe turn it to PK. And then if we need more, we can come back to it in August. The one thing I'll flag is that a lot of this data, and you see there in parentheses at the bottom, that we use to inform how we're doing on these KPMs and this report is old data. It's 2019 data. It goes back to some of the comments that were made previously about the importance of data. We're intentionally looking at how we can lessen that gap between when data is received and when we use it to inform our decisions. But the reality is that we're working on a couple-year-old data in a lot of these spaces. Next slide, please. Traffic fatalities and serious injury rates. This is how we're doing, and this is as measured per 100 million vehicle miles traveled. You'll see there on the factors what we think is at play here. When we think about our role as ODOT in this space, we really think about it. We like to talk about the 4 E's. So we talk about education, we talk about engineering, we talk about enforcement, and then of course, I'm not going to remember the other E, so apologies there. But the education space, is really about the programs that we have to inform drivers how to be safe. We have programs, excuse me, that are geared towards preventing DUIs, that are geared towards motorcycle safety, and then we also have a publicity campaign. And I was listening to Pandora the other day, and I heard one of our ads on there that talks about best practices to be safe. So we're looking education-wise how we can do better there. We have made a change to our highway safety office organizationally. We've actually moved this recently under the DMV because we think there's going to be efficiencies there, because DMV is really the delivery arm of a lot of this education. And so we hope to see some benefits and efficiencies there that will maybe drive this trend in the other direction. Engineering wise, there's things that we've done. In particular, recently, we've stood up a program that the commission just approved a couple months ago to devote devote dollars, $10 million initially this year to improve pedestrian safety in those corridors of greatest need that have the demonstrated trends of fatalities and serious injuries, and to do it quickly. And that's an area that we're really diving into and doing some research on. Karen Rowe is leading a team for us to figure out a long-term solution there. So that's some of the ways we're trying to address this trend that we're seeing here. If you can, next, oh, awesome, emergency relief services. Thank you, Paula. Next slide, please. And on that emergency relief services, the piece there that's relevant, we do have incident responders that are in most of our regions that support when accidents happen. And we also fund, I think, some EMT training as well. There's also a program we have on enforcement, the other thing I failed to mention, where we provide grants to local law enforcement agencies for them to come out and do enforcement related to traffic. As everyone, I think, around this table knows, enforcement agencies, law enforcement agencies have been hit hard and are underfunded and under-resourced in a lot of spaces. And so not a lot of them are taking us up on this, but we're re-looking at that grant opportunity and seeing if there's ways we can bolster that. So shifting to passenger rail ridership is down. Probably no surprise to anybody. On this one, I will point out, this is more recent data that we're working with. So you'll see there, we have 2020 data here. But of course, a big hit from COVID to passenger rail ridership, which in turn created a situation where we ended up cutting our service levels from, I believe, 2 round trips down to 1 between Eugene and Seattle. Now we are actually at a moment where we're gonna up it back up to 2, I believe, round trips, and so that's a good sign because we're seeing a surge in ridership. We also have a marketing campaign right now to talk about the precautions we're taking to keep passengers safe vis-a-vis the pandemic and COVID as they ride the rails, as well as we are also in conversations with Union Pacific to analyze potential infrastructure improvements that we can make along the corridor and figure out where would be the smartest place to target those investments, with the thinking being if we create some infrastructure improvements, that'll help reliability, help service times, and hopefully bring more people to the platform. We also had a record of decision from Federal Railroad Administration a few months ago, the bottom line of which allows us to apply for federal funding for infrastructure associated with passenger rail. So that's a really exciting moment that we're in now too, is that we have maybe more resources that we can bring to bear to trying to bring passenger ridership up. Next slide, please. Transit rides. These have been hit hard by COVID as well, but you'll see that the data we're looking at is 2019, but we know they've been hit hard, and so I anticipate we'll continue to see a dip, as I think most folks are tracking. Most transit agencies, I think all transit agencies in our state, have cut their service levels in half to maintain social distance. And so, and what I mean, not service levels, I mean the ability, the capacity of each bus, right, has had to be cut in half in order to maintain maintain that social distance. So that's a factor that's going to continue to see a little bit of a decline here. The thing I would flag is House Bill 17 gave us some investments through the statewide transportation improvement fund to help local transit agencies increase their service, add new services in places where it was needed and there wasn't. A lot of that work was just getting underway when COVID happened, and a lot of that got sidelined. So we're anticipating that now that we're coming out of the pandemic, that work will really hit the ground running again, and we'll see some improvements and hopefully more percentage of riders as we move forward. But we're, of course, watching that closely. Next slide, please. And this final one on customer satisfaction, this includes, and this is through a survey, and again, here we have data that's more recent than 2019 because we did it more recently. This includes satisfaction with DMV, with our commerce and compliance, so our motor carrier division, and also our tools like Ask ODOT, which is basically our customer service arm of the agency. But primarily, this really revolves around DMV. And here, what we tried to do is shift services, like I talked about a little bit earlier, to online services. One of the big limiting factors to that was that we didn't have the IT infrastructure to do that until recently. And so there was a big project a few years ago that I think was concluded, I want to say 2019 or early 2020, that basically was an upgrade of the IT infrastructure for the entirety of DMV. And it allows us now to shift, and we have shifted a lot of our services online. So you can now do your title and registration online. You can get your, you can renew your IDs or your driver's license online. These are all new things, and I hate to say that they're new because it seems like we should have been doing that for a long time, but they are. And so that will shift. We anticipate our customer service approval ratings, if you will, moving forward. So we anticipate this trend shifting. The other thing I'll flag for you, I think is related. It's not, well, it's related. We have a new division administrator in DMV, a woman named Amy Joyce, who is really leaning into this work and all about modernizing the customer experience. And so I think we were in good hands as we try to shift this one. And of course, this is important for us because this is really the interface that a lot of folks have with the department. So next slide, please. I'm sorry to go through it so quickly, but I knew we had limited time. These are the things, though, that we're hoping to get from you, and welcome your thoughts today, but then circle back on in August. I'd like your thoughts on our agency performance measures in general and the consolidation effort that I ran through, the spaghetti chart and the others, our thinking about it, ways we can think differently about it, be more intentional about it. Would welcome any thoughts you have there. But then to your statutory requirements here on KPMs, would like your feedback and ask for your feedback in August on that annual report, as well as what we're doing on the off-target KPMs that I just ran you through, those 4. And also the 2 changes. And again, those changes were in part brought by this committee, but if you have thoughts on how we're structuring or restructuring those performance measures associated with DMV customer service and walkways and bikeways, would really welcome your thoughts there, and that will inform the conversation we bring to the commission later in the year, and then drive that process. So I will pause. And happy to answer questions, and then have PK with me as well to answer immediate questions. Thanks.
Cooper, it looked like Paula had a question in the chat box that maybe you can answer.
I'm a visual person too, and I get stuck on something, and then that's all I can think about. So even though you kept talking, I'm staring at that box on the spaghetti chart.
Yeah,
I heard you say later about the question about where and how to integrate the various performance measures, whether they're federal or part of the strategic action or some of the KPMs. But could you go back to that one chart? I just trying to sort out what I'm looking at.
You bet. Sabrina, can you help us?
It was the one where there was a gray vertical box on the far left side and then the spaghetti took off.
Yep.
Okay, just a second.
I think it was the fourth one, maybe fifth one. And we've got the architect of the slide online as well. So
No, fourth.
This one.
this fourth one, yeah.
That's it.
So I'm going to explain how I think about it, and then maybe I'll let PK add anything that I'm missing. But really, it's a bit of kind of two thoughts in one in terms of a visual. On the left-hand side is our strategic action plan, priorities, and goals. And remember, that's the kind of tent that we have set, and that the commission
So
has
all
set.
three: equity, modern transportation, and sufficient and reliable funding.
Yes.
Okay, that's
Yeah.
all SAP.
That's all SAP. All those gray boxes are SAP. And again,
Got it.
the idea is to the degree possible, nest underneath those SAP goals, the ones that we have, the KPMs and the federal measures, recognizing that's not always going to work, but we do have a cycle for updating those measures and looking at how do we do that in a way that would make them right to fit under that SAP tent. Does that make sense?
Yes, totally.
So,
That's all
okay.
I needed. Okay,
You bet.
thank
You
you.
bet.
So hold on one second. Cooper, is there, so you just said there's a chance that we could go back and revisit the SAP. So SAP has the outcomes, right? And they have 10 different categories, and then they have 3 categories under each of the 10. So there's about 30 different strategic outcomes for the SAP. Is that right?
Yeah, so recall there's the goals that are associated with the 3. So on the slide, you've got the goals that are nested underneath the 3 priority areas. And then we have 10, I think technically 11 implementing outcomes, that is what we're calling them, that we want to see in 21 to 23 that really touch on many of these goals, the ones that are on the slide now, right? So for instance, congestion management touches access mobility, right? Because managing congestion is dependent upon how we have a multimodal network that supports and presents other opportunities for moving, right? It has a touch point, obviously, with preservation and stewardship because of the impacts that congestion has to our roadways, climate, et cetera, right? So those are the 10 implementing actions that we're wanting to see over the next couple of years. We have measures associated with those. I think the point I'm making is at a higher level, at the goal level, we haven't identified measures for these. The goals are really associated with those 2-year. This is what we think will move the needle towards these goals. But the higher level measures is where there's a bit of a gap, and I think that's where PK and the team is looking at how do we fill that and what do we fill it with, and can we use these other measures that we have, integrate those in or morph them to help us gauge how we're doing on those SAP goals, that second column there on the box. Does that make sense, Karen?
Yeah, no, that provides a little bit more clarity for it. I just, I know you went through this rather fast, and even
Yep.
I'm familiar with it, and it's still, I'm trying to
Yep.
reconcile what do we have and where are we trying to go. So
Yep.
that does provide some clarity there.
Yeah, it is complicated, and like you say, you're familiar with it, so I can imagine heads might be spinning for those that aren't. So happy to revisit this in a way that's helpful, but also really want to devote the time for your feedback in August to this. So if you have thoughts on things that are still fuzzy or unclear, feel free to mention them now or send them to us so we can make sure we answer them for you, and so we can have as fruitful of a conversation as possible in August.
Cooper, Mike's got his hand raised.
I'm sorry, for some reason I can't see him.
That's okay.
That's okay. Thanks. So at of being blasphemous, my big question, you asked for general reaction. My big reaction to the performance measure regime, for the most part, so what? And I can say that with experience for KPMs, because quite frankly, most people don't even look at them. And you're required to do it. LFO takes a look, but the legislators don't for the most part. And maybe something's changed in the last few years. You don't get federal money if you don't do the federal ones. So I get that. So what? I'm wondering how, so as probably as important as the metrics themselves is how you're going to use them. How do they fit into your business process? Where decisions are made, are they relevant or not? Are they in the conversation or not? When real decisions like investment decisions and business process change decisions, do you look at them? So that's my big reaction to these things. The numbers and the metrics, you guys are the experts. You can come up with what the numbers, what things you ought to be measuring. I get that. It's really, do you use them? Does anybody give a shit? So, and quite frankly, with KPMs, I know for 90% of the legislature does not. And so I guess I would say, if you really care about the SAP ones, put them in your KPM, make them your KPMs en masse. And then tell the legislature, this is what we're going to pay attention to, and this is how we're going to run our business based on this data. So I'm sorry for the soapbox, but I've been doing this way too many years. I was vice chair of the Progress Board for years. One of the greatest performance metric regimes that any jurisdiction on the planet has ever come up with, and the legislature never looked at them. So what is the question?
I agree with you, Mike. And to me, the legislature, they may or may not look at anything. I tend to think they probably don't. And I agree with you. If the commission has decided these are our priorities, that's what we ought to say our KPMs ought to be. And even if the legislature never looks at them, the OTC will look at them, hopefully. And if we aren't achieving what we are setting out to do, then we need to change what we're doing.
Agreed. And you also have a chance to manage up. You have a chance every time before the legislature to sell what's really important. And if you're living that by following these metrics, then you've got integrity in front of legislative committees and in front of transient executives in the governor's office. So it's a chance to manage up.
Fantastic feedback. Thank you.
Yeah, Mike, really, really well. Amazing points. So the only other thing I would add is just to put an exclamation on that is it's about the systems and the connections between the performance measures as it relates to those systems in order to achieve those outcomes.
Yeah.
And that's where the rubber meets the road.
These are great points. Go ahead.
I'll just
please.
jump on that just a little bit. Another lesson from Progress Board days is that the real value in those metrics was the ability to put them in a suite and tell a story that's really going on. Very seldom does one metric tell the whole story. So if you can think about them in conjunction, I think that's what Amber was trying to get across. You can tell a much more robust story about what's really going on. And that requires a little bit of analytics to think about those things and some practical knowledge to understand, what would I change if this metric was going the wrong way? Unless you've got a good sense of the systems, it's really hard to know.
Commissioner, I think you're muted.
Following up on that, I think when we come back in August and have the discussion of what our recommendation is going to be for the KPMs, I think we ought to be thinking, what is the story that the OTC and ODOT is trying to tell, and the story that we need to tell the legislature next session, and then pick KPMs that we think will measure what we want to talk about, so that when we have to go to the legislature and explain, our outcomes, our successes, and where we are failing, we're telling the story of what we want to say. What are the points that we want to be making when we go there? And so I'd like us all to think about what is the story, and then how do we come up with those measures? Great point, both of you. Fabulous.
Well, this is just the kickoff. So glad to have, if we have great points that quickly, then I'm sure we'll have a continued great conversation in August on this topic. We'll do some work, to your point, Chair Smith. In the meantime, we come back, appreciate the initial guidance and thoughts. I know we're over time though. So I don't know if it's worth what we would like to do typically, but I think we'll maybe forego it this time unless you tell me otherwise, Chair Smith. Is quickly review kind of the outcomes that we heard from these conversations in terms of next steps. What I heard from the first part of this conversation on the project delivery pieces, I think there's still some questions on the DBE work, the workforce development work, the climate work, some other things that we hear you on, and we will bring those back as we have those conversations. And there was an intentional decision on our part not to really delve into all of those too deeply, because we know we have a space coming up on future agendas to talk about those kind of more holistically. So there's that piece. On this piece, we'll do some legwork based on this initial feedback from you all on KPMs and our Constellation of measures and how we're actually employing them to the main point, and be prepared for that conversation in August. So really appreciate that. The other thing I'd flag is I think we're still trying to land on the August meeting on dates, but Sabrina, correct me if we've already landed that. But it's looking like late August, so appreciate folks' flexibility.
We did land on Tuesday, August 24th.
Awesome, there you go. So so that's our next time. With that, I think that's all the housekeeping stuff for me, and I'll turn it back over to Chair Smith.
I just had one more thing. I think we need to make sure we follow up with that. Amber and Ted, we're going to get with David to talk about. So that's all I can think of. And does anybody have anything else they want to say for the good of the order before we sign off today?
Paula, it looks like I'm sorry to put you on the spot, but it looks like you were going to say something. No, okay, sorry.
I'm staring at my calendar and yeah, okay. I'll let you.
All right. Thanks everyone again. Great ideas. This is a terrific team. I think we're gonna shake some things up.
Thank you all. Have a great day.
Nice to see everybody.
Bye.
Bye.